Before we get into this episode properly, we felt like we had to give a quick tribute to Bernard Cribbins, who unfortunately passed away this week at the age of 94. Bernard Cribbins obviously played Wilfred Mott in the revived era of Doctor Who, Donna Noble's grandfather. He also had a big part in the Peter Cushing non-canon Doctor Who films, none of which I've seen. But obviously, he's been a huge figure in acting, especially in Britain, for a long, long time. And it's obviously a huge loss.
Yes, he's a really wonderful performer, and in preparation for this tribute, I went and watched some of his episodes of uh of Doctor Who, um, just to sort of remind myself again of what made his performance of Wilfred particularly special. And man, there's so much. There's a magic in that performance. I really don't think that's an over exaggeration to say.
You can definitely tell that he's a huge fan of the show. Wilf is, by a country mile, the best family member of a companion that has ever existed in the show's long run. I don't think that's even up for debate. Wilfred Mott is just the best family member of a companion.
I did rewatch some episodes. I rewatched uh Partners in Crime, The End of Time, and it really it did get me to those emotional places. I loved the little exchanges between Tennant and Wilfred Mott in that are peppered all the way throughout The End of Time. I think in particular the bit where they're having a conversation just in the cafe, or even like, the doctor's, he's kind of in a rush. He's desperately trying to find the master, but it's really lovely that they took that nice little pause in the story to really let the writing and also the performances shine, because they have a wonderful a chemistry to them, which is just so lovely to see. And there's just so many little beautiful nuances to that performance. Because here's the thing: a lot of it obviously has to do with the writing and how strong that is. But I am very convinced that if you had given this character to another actor, certainly an actor with, lesser caliber of performance um than Cribbins is giving, I think it would have been very easy to mess that performance up. If someone else had played Wilfred, they may have played him as either maybe too silly or too sort of old man dithery, or just not had that level of sincerity. And I really think it's a tribute to his performance that he's able to really nail all of those nuances, because he's funny. Again, he's a bit old and dithery, but he's got that wonderful wide-eyed sense of wonder and adventure at the universe. He reminds me in that sense of a lot of the sort of best interpretations of Ebenezer Scrooge at the end of A Christmas Carol, when he's changed his ways and he's has this sort of passion for life and things like that. That element, that joy and that wonder, I think, is throughout all of Cribbins' performance as Wilfred. And it's kind of great because he represents, I think, what the Doctor loves about humanity, that sort of shared bond that the Doctor and many humans have of the, that wide-eyed wonder of the universe, and that sense of kindness and decency. I really loved how at the beginning of the episode the woman comes on TV and she says, "I basically that yeah, you never killed somebody," but it's like, there's no shame in that.
Tributes have been pouring in this week about what a good person he was, what a nice man. Reading all of them, it's like, yeah, I 100% believe all of this. You can just tell that the entertainment community in Britain is reeling this week. And honestly, so are we. Like, it came as a shock the other day when I found out.
I didn't even realize, because I assumed he was quite old, but I didn't realize he was quite that old even. So I think that, yeah, that really got to me.
Anytime this happens, the same thing happened when John Hurt died. Obviously the first thought is that's horrible. This has happened, but there's always a thought in the back of your mind where it's like, man, it's a shame they couldn't have filmed more stories with this actor before this happened.
Yeah. Yeah, you always wonder in those scenarios what could have been, what projects they could have undertaken. Um, and I don't know, because not being from the UK and sort of having Doctor Who, certainly for me, being the biggest exposure I had to Cribbins and his acting. I don't know. I assume the impact would be considerably bigger if you were in the UK and grew up with his work.
Uh-huh.
Um, but again, even just watching Doctor Who with the caliber of performance he's given, um, the loss I think is definitely there. And as I said, when watching the End of Time again, I did get really emotional. I love that bit at the end where the Doctor and Wilfred are talking, and he's like, "Oh, we must be like insects to you," and he's like, "I know, I think you're giants." And then he gets this kind of churlish uncomfortableness. But there's even in little moments like that, there's just such a level of care um, to the nuances of this character. The fact that he probably put a lot of himself into that character makes perfect sense because you really feel um, every emotion there. Um, and I think that's definitely worth remembering.
Bernard Cribbins is uh, a national treasure, you gotta say, and he will be sorely missed by not just the Doctor Who community, but the entire British entertainment industry.
And I'd be wondering when to mention this because it's been something that's been swirling in my mind about Doctor Who for a while now. But you notice in Doctor Who, the Doctor has a real care and fascination with sort of, the average person. I think even the Ninth Doctor said that's the most important thing in all creation. And I really think that Cribbins' performance sort of proves that. And it reminds me of, funnily enough, the line from Horton Hears a Who, a person's a person no matter how small. And I think Wilfred as a character and Cribbins' the fact that he anchors it with such a sincerity really proves that. And even, as the Doctor says, it's not even about being small because he thinks, human beings are giants. And I think Wilfred as a character perfectly exemplifies that. And I think it's so wonderful that we get all of those qualities condensed into this one character again, anchored by this beautiful, beautiful performance. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there.
It's obvious that's very fair. It's definitely worth mentioning. There was like whenever Wilf's on screen, you can't help but like smile because there's just such a sincerity in the way that Cribbins portrays the character. It's so easy to empathize with Wilfred. He's really the most human character that the show has ever produced, I think. And Bernard will be deeply and sorely missed by all of us.
Yes. Rest in peace.
And with that, we return you to your regularly scheduled Two Who's Review episode. Enjoy. Whoa, check your clocks. It's another episode of Two Who's Review. I'm Alex.
And I'm.
That is how it. Yep. What are you talking about? Do another take. We're not doing another take. We're just doing that. I'm Alex. Go on.
I'm laughing kind of hysterically. I'm Fitz. Yeah, we're not doing another take. Of
No,
course it's
not.
staying in there.
Yeah, and today we're looking at the long game.
Yay.
I don't know why I just did that out of nowhere. I just thought, let's try something a bit different.
Well, would you say that it was a little bit off the cuff?
I have regrets. Okay, so this is the halfway mark in series one.
Ugh, we're
Uh,
there already.
yeah, we're halfway
Uh,
through the season.
Is it? So yeah, it's 12 episodes, is it?
13 episodes.
13, yeah.
Uh,
Cool.
it's an episode which, on reflection, sets up the finale, and also kind of
Yeah.
doesn't. But we'll figure that out in a bit.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, it's the long game. Should we just jump into the timescale stuff? I don't think there's much to
I'll
put
say
here.
this. I know, and we'll obviously be able to check this out with the timescales, but I'm aware that this episode is considered to be kind of just a nothing episode. It's considered, at least by default, the worst episode of season one. I honestly didn't mind it that much. I actually kind of enjoyed certain parts of it, but I think broadly I understand why people kind of forget it because it, it it's situated in a season where it has quite a number of uh, really good episodes. I think, and even if all the episodes aren't like amazing, even if every episode isn't Dalek, like the good bits of those episodes are more memorable than most of what's here. Whereas, like, there's nothing wrong terribly I can find on a technical level. I mean, maybe apart from a couple of details, but like again, it's just kind of there. It's an episode. It's a show that exists. So I kind of agree but disagree with people's thoughts on it, but we'll get into that.
Well, it's a shame that it's sandwiched between Dalek and Father's Day, two
Yeah.
undisputably better episodes.
Yeah.
Overall, this has a rating of 5.7 out of 10.
I
I think they're pretty spot on with that one. I don't. I mean, in some
yeah.
areas, look. I was expecting this to be one of our more cut and dry discussions because
Mm.
it's the long game. What is there to say
It is
about
what
it?
it is.
But as it turns out, like maybe a bit. There's maybe
Yeah, a little.
yeah. I mean, we'll figure things out as we go, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
5.5 for plot.
Um, yeah, it's like it's one of those things where like stuff happens, but it doesn't feel like a lot is happening. I mean, maybe in the end there's a fair bit, but like and I don't know whether it's because it's situated in a season with quite a few knockout episodes, but yeah, it just kind of it does get a little bit forgettable, I think. I mean, I remember a fair bit of the plot, but that's just because I've watched it twice in 2 days.
Well, the other thing is that for a lot of it, there's not a lot that the Doctor and Rose are doing. For the most part,
Yeah,
it's
it's an Adam
it's an
story,
Adam story, and
which is very ironic because he never shows up again.
yeah, well, it's fitting that a companion's final episode is their spotlight episode. So I
Yeah,
mean, it follows that
it
grand
does.
tradition, I suppose.
Uh,
6.8 for acting.
yeah, I mean they're pretty fun. Simon Pegg's clearly having
Well,
a
yeah,
fun
he
time.
he elevates the material, but
Yeah.
I don't think anyone else delivers a standout performance.
No, no, like there's nothing. Um, oh, I mean more to say that like there's no performances that I can point on and say, oh, you are clearly terrible. Granted, though, again, maybe this is just my classic Who brain turning on here because I'm used to at least a lot of side characters having some pretty wacky performances. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
but
has
there's nothing
a
like offensively bad with any
no,
of the performances, I think.
no one's phoning it in.
Yeah.
5.8 for effects.
Yeah, that's about fair. I mean, we'll get into this, but the Jagrafest, like, it's not the worst 3D effects I've ever seen, but
It's just
it's not amazing.
well, it's not it's not an incredibly realistic effect, which I wouldn't mind if the Jackerfest had a more interesting design.
Yeah,
But like, it's just kind of a big old brown blob on the roof.
yeah, yeah.
So there's really it's not really a very memorable design in the very least.
Yeah.
5.2 for replay value.
Um, I found this.
I think I'd bump that up slightly.
Yeah, I enjoyed it I think I did enjoy it at least as much the second time as the first time, and the first time I watched it in preparation for this podcast, it was certainly better than I remembered. There's actually some fairly keen bits of political commentary in it that I kind of like.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe
we'll get to
maybe a
those.
little on the nose, but still pretty
We'll
good.
get to those elements of the story, but I think that this episode has it's 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 weird to say, but has it aged well? Like,
Yeah.
well, I know that sounds mad to say right now, but we'll get into why we think that in a
Yeah,
bit.
no,
But
I think it does, and we will definitely get into it.
this is the lowest rated Series 1 and, by extension, Ninth Doctor story.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to maybe save my judgments for it till we get to the end of the season, but yeah, I can kind of see why. I'd be very interested to see how I feel about Boomtown in comparison. Um,
Yeah, Boomtown is the only question mark, because I don't think the
yeah,
long game is better than anything we've watched from the Ninth Doctor so far.
yeah, yeah, certainly. I mean, I think yeah, because even the other episodes, even if they have flaws, and some of them do, the really good bits are overall more memorable than most of what's hidden here. So yeah, I'd agree with that.
43 out of 102 people say that this story requires a previous.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to establish sort of these character dynamics and where Adam came from.
It's mainly for Adam, I think. Like, because
Yeah,
if this is your first, if you don't haven't watched Dalek, Adam is very much a blank slate for a lot of this story,
yeah.
and he's kind of inconsistent as well.
Um,
Well, I mean, I'll explain how I feel that way when we get into
yeah.
brass tacks and
We
discuss it a bit
will.
more. But there are a few elements of this character and the writing of the character and the performance of the character that kind of don't fit with each other in a weird way. Like,
I
it's
feel like I think I might know what you're talking about, and we obviously will get into it. But I think it would be a mistake um to confuse inconsistency with some character development. I mean, they don't have a lot of time because it's one episode to do it, but I didn't mind some of the changes he went through
oh, I'm not sorry,
as a
I'm
character.
not referring to from last episode to this one. I mean, like, within this episode.
No, I mean that too. I mean
Oh,
the way he changes throughout this episode, I didn't mind it that much. I actually felt he had more character development more character development than Rose did, but that's mainly because it's a very Adam-centric episode for whatever reason. But anyway, we will get into all of that later on when we move on.
yeah. Yeah. Well, let's just read the synopsis out then, shall we? The Doctor
Yeah,
and
sure.
Rose arrive in the year 200,000 to see the fourth great and bountiful human empire, but something's gone wrong. Someone is holding back the development of mankind. Who could have done this, and why?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's basically
I
the
suppose we
plot.
should jump into this. I really like the idea of like something that Russell T Davies does really well across his run is world building.
Yes.
Oh no, like the idea that the Ninth Doctor initially painted the fourth great and bountiful human empire. You know,
Hmm.
this mega colossus. It's well, first of all, it's a it's a dystopian sci-fi nightmare the way the Earth is painted with mega cities all over the place. And
Hmm.
I mean, by some respect, in this story, at least the way the Doctor describes it, its shape is a good thing, but we don't see it, so we can't judge. But like
Yeah.
spanning hundreds of planets and all these different civilizations with Earth at the center, and then the bait and switch of, oh, hang on, something's wrong here. It's a really
Yeah.
classic Doctor Who setup of just, we land somewhere, hang on, something's wrong, let's figure it out. But
Yeah.
painting it within the landscape of this what this human empire is supposed to be is a really interesting touch.
Hmm. I think yeah, and they that sort of twist, they get to it pretty quickly when the Doctor says, "Oh, it's the height of cuisine and politeness," and we just like they're dropped right in the middle of this weird fast food lineup, and there's all these rude people stumbling around. So it's interesting that they went that way, and I think you're right to point out that RTD is good at world building because there's a confidence in making a move like that. But the good news is the world building does back it up, and that goes to even tiny little details like the fact that when Adam gets the open brain surgery, I guess you could call it, he vomits, but it comes out as a little cube of ice, and they said, oh yeah, by the way, we've put these nano termites in your throat, and they've turned your vomit into an ice block. Now, a small detail and good for a bit of a fun comedic gag, but it does say a lot about I think the level of care that RTD has put into this world building.
Yeah, it's really nice. It's really nice to get those kinds of small little touches throughout. Those are the kinds of things that flesh out a narrative like this to be a lot more than what it is, which is it's essentially a check your sources story. It's
a fake news story.
Yeah, which is the element that has held up remarkably well.
Yeah,
in in the current political, maybe not the current political landscape, but certainly of the last 5 years or so.
It's quite astonishing how well it maps on.
Yeah, the spreading of what we see it constantly. Social media and echo chambers, and a certain previous president. Telling people something and they're just instantly believing it without asking any questions about it.
Even the subtle jabs at a lot of horror, let's call it what it is, sort of racist immigration policies when the doctor says, why are there only humans here? And I think Kathika says, it's not like they're banned or anything, but immigration's just gotten a bit tighter, there's a lot of threats out there. And then when Simon Pegg says, I'm paraphrasing here slightly, but he says, create a climate of fear and the borders just take care of themselves.
I'm not exactly certain why it's a part of their plan to keep the borders closed. And this is where we delve into what the actual plot is as opposed to the theming. But just if there's anything you wanted to mention about the theming before we move on to that, because I felt like you weren't quite done.
So I think that's it. I like the fact that they're alluding to all this stuff, and again that it has aged remarkably well. Even this is a small thing, I guess, but even the bit where they're having the meeting, where Kathika is opening up her brain, and then she says something like, "Welcome, ladies, gentlemen. Multi-sex or undecided." Now, I don't know. Maybe I'm a cis guy. Perhaps I'm not the best to comment on this, but and I get that the way that line is phrased, it's almost like a joke, but that kind of I guess you call it gender diversity. That also has kind of aged quite well, and the fact that they did that in Doctor Who, it's just one of those things we think, oh, that's a kind of a nice little detail. Yeah, good on you, RTD.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that line was written now, it probably wouldn't be. They didn't quite cover all of it, but for 2005, it's a nice attempt.
Yeah, there's an attempt.
Yeah. But let's just talk about the plot before we veer too far off of the overall story, because okay, so I feel like we should get this out of the way really quickly, and spoilers for the end of this season, but this episode is a setup for the finale. In Bad Wolf, we jump ahead 100 years and we see that the fourth great and bountiful human empire hasn't progressed. It turns out they've been still stuck the way they are. We've moved on from news to game shows, and it turns out that this whole time the Daleks have been essentially breeding humans to be turned into more Daleks. Cool. How does this episode fit into that? Aside from just stunting the growth of the human race, why are a series of Banks working with a Jagrafess who is a part of a Dalek plan? It's the kind of thing where when you're watching episode 12 of this series and the Doctor says someone's been playing a long game,
Hmm.
and you hear, "Oh, that was the title of the other episode. Oh, that's clever." But as you're watching this, knowing what's coming
You
in the
think,
future, you think, "Wait, does this connect?"
yeah.
Because they don't say where the Jackrafest came from, do they? They kind of leave it open ended, which makes me
No,
think that it might be a Dalek experiment.
well, that's the thing. I don't even know if they put like that much sort of thought into it, because the strange thing is I was watching this again because I watched this episode a second time this morning, and I realized what is actually the point of the Jaggerfest here, apart from being a spooky monster to, scare an audience?
Yeah,
Because
like the editor is
if
a great villain for this kind of story. You don't need a Jackrafest.
yeah, exactly, like the editor, like he says that his motivation, he's got his, a bunch of banks that are kind of sort of profiting from this. Well, why would you need an alien monster to do that? Isn't you know it, corporate greed, isn't that the real monster? But
Well,
like
you say that, but
beyond that,
yeah.
yeah, like and I know, as you say, I just said that as a joke, but like yeah, that's basically it. Like if and the fact is, they don't. If you want corporate interests to profit off, you know, uh, control of the media,
Not to mention
you don't
not
you
to, not to
don't need
mention
any giant slimy
yeah.
monsters. We know this.
Also, not to mention like the whole keeping the borders closed thing, and
Yeah,
making sure that the public aren't asking too many questions, so that they
yeah.
keep buying the same
We've
shit.
been living it, man.
Yeah.
We don't need a giant slimy monster. We just need the horrible sliminess of corporate interests. So, like it. Apart from being, a monster to again to look icky and gross, like it doesn't really map onto the plot itself. You don't really need it. Um, and the strangest thing is, it's again the special effects for the Jaggerfest aren't that amazing, and they can't. And I think it's clear the writers know that, because you only see it for I think it's less than 5 minutes in the end. Or everything else, it's all POV from the Jaggerfest's point of view, and you can see the characters looking up. And I mean that's fine. That's a classic Doctor Who thing to do.
Yeah.
But like, why is it there in the first place then if it's not really?
Well, my main sticking point is that the Daleks. We find out that they're harvesting, uh, basically living cells from humans in order to build new
Yeah.
Daleks, a billion cells at a time, or like one cell in a billion at a time, rather.
Yeah.
We don't hear about any disappearances in this story. We don't hear about people going missing that would factor into that. So
Yeah, I think like mm, mm, yeah. Mm. Yeah, I mean, because people definitely do go missing here when they go to level 500, but that doesn't really map on to Bad Wolf. They don't, yeah, yeah, but they don't do anything in relation to the Daleks really, which is quite odd. And the whole idea of having um the human empire being stunted, you could take care of that in like 5 minutes with a little explanation in Bad Wolf. You could have like the whole that kind of early setup of them, going onto the station and the doctor saying, "Yeah, it's a human empire, everything's great and wonderful." That part of it, you could have stuck that on to maybe the beginning of Bad Wolf and just taking care of it there, so it doesn't quite like why is this whole
Uh,
thing here?
yeah, maybe. I think it does pay off eventually when you get to Bad Wolf, because
Hmm.
there's another piece of commentary about what the Doctor leaves behind.
Yeah.
When that comes up in Bad Wolf, that's really good. But in terms of an overall plot, like I'm gonna have to really do some thinking about. Maybe by the time we get to Bad Wolf and the Parting of the Ways, it'll be a bit clearer. Maybe there's something from that
Yeah.
episode I'm forgetting. But
Hmm.
in the moment as I was watching it, being very familiar with the plot of the finale,
Yeah.
it
And I
wasn't it
think
wasn't quite sliding into place as well as I would have liked it to.
yeah. And like there are some of it that help set up other things in the series, like the fact that um Adam nearly basically wrecks the whole timeline, which is a
Mm.
ridiculously dangerous thing to do. that I wonder if that kind of boldness sort of spurs Rose on to help save her dad in the next episode. But again, that's a whole separate thing. It
Yeah.
doesn't quite map on to the overarching story of the series-long story arc, which is being, otherwise it's being pretty carefully constructed. So I think tend to agree with you when you say that this story, or certain elements of it at least, they don't quite sort of mesh terribly well with that ending. But as you say, we may change our minds once we get to Bad Wolf, but we'll have to.
Yeah, and it's something I don't want. It's something I don't want to fault this episode for too much. I feel like watching this episode in a vacuum, like all the stuff they're doing with the villain, the commentary, it works enough for the purposes of what they're trying to do. Again, the Jagrafess is very unnecessary, but when we're just focusing on the editor and his interactions with everyone. By the way, I feel like it's been unspoken, but might as well put it out there. Simon Pegg is the best part of this episode.
Yeah, he's really good fun. You can tell he's really enjoying the performance and playing this character. He just, he's just really having fun with it, and it's always great when you see particularly a villain, an actor who's playing a villain, when they're really getting into the role. That's always just great to see.
Yeah, and he's not doing it particularly hammy either. Like, he's not going too overboard with it. He's playing it, at times really subtle, and at times really aggro, and at times really whimsical. Like, there's the moment where he finds out that the Doctor and Rose don't exist, and he's genuinely amused by it, and he's sort of playful in a weird kind of way.
You know what I just thought of? This is just a random idea that just floated into my head. I'm gonna just throw out a hypothetical for you, and I just want you to give me your raw reaction.
Was he initially going to play the Master in this?
I was literally going to say Simon Pegg is the Master. Yeah, what do you think?
Well, at the end of this, I tried to look up some kind of behind the scenes stuff from the long game, and I wanted to try and find out, were there, in the initial draft, was this going to be the Master? Doing some kind of control humanity kind of thing. But then when they came up with the Time War idea and the fact that there are no more Time Lords, they changed it to a different character, which may be why the Banks thing seems kind of just thrown in there towards the end to justify this character being there. But, I mean, he would be a good Master. I kind of agree with you.
He does have some similarities to John Sim, which you might think maybe, I don't know, maybe that's why they went with John Sim, but I think he would make a fun Master. He's got a charm and a kind of a sleazy smarminess to him. And again, he knows how to have fun with the role. Even though there's given he's only in one episode and he's not doing heaps and heaps of, stuff, he still knows how to draw out quite a surprising amount of breadth and depth of nuance and emotion in the character, given what he's doing in the episode. So
yeah, the way he gets progressively angrier every time he catches Suki in a lie, and then at the end he just snaps. He's like, liar. But also a really understated moment I quite like is when he's asking the corpses to check the Doctor and Rose. He goes down the line. He's like, check him, double check him, triple check him, quadruple check him, and then he goes to speak to a fifth person, and then just goes, nah, he sort of abandons it. He's like, he's about to say quintuple check them, and he's like, nah, they've got the message, it's fine. That's a really small moment, but it's something that I quite appreciate.
Yeah, it's those little details, and I think undoubtedly that's got to be a bit of Simon Pegg's improv.
It would have to
coming through there.
Yeah,
and it's really nice that when an actor is able to bring that out of their performance, but also when a director and a writer can clearly see, okay, well, they're having fun with it here, and this is going to really work, so let's just run with it. So it's good that they, were able to tap into that with this character, because I think, given what he is, just sort of meant to represent, evil corporate interest, I think there would have been a risk if they miscast him. He would have just been such a bland, run-of-the-mill villain.
Well, it's
Um,
yet another season 1 villain that's motivated by greed and money.
mm,
I
it all
don't.
comes down to money.
Yeah, exactly. It happened for like the 4th time, I think, if we count Van Staten this season. It's been a financial profit has been
Yeah.
a primary motivator for our villain. I don't think it shows up again for the rest of the season. I think this is the last time it happens. It's very interesting that
Mm,
and yeah, it's very interesting that that kind of narrative thread has been so present so far. Because
mm,
another thing is that season 1 is very focused on Earth. We never see another planet. We never, the furthest we travel in space is to, places like Platform 1 and Satellite 5, which are orbiting
yeah.
Earth. Every other time,
Yeah.
it's a very earthly destination. And
I actually hadn't thought about that, but you're right. There's nothing. It's all very Earth centric. I think that makes sense though, because I think it's sort of um implanting in the audience's mind the Doctor's relationship to Earth and his fondness for Earth, which is symbolized by the companions he meets, in particular Rose. But and I think I'm not sure if it's like the writers playing it safe, but I think either way, it just makes sense to have a lot of these episodes, or really all of them, to be very Earth centric.
well, I think it allows for this Bad Wolf storyline to be a lot more focused. Because another thing with this new show, unlike the classic series, is that there's a huge focus on the companion's family life. I'm not sure if we've ever had certainly to this extent, as much of a deep dive into a character's
Yeah,
familiar relationships as we have in the past.
I don't think so. Not to I mean, maybe a little bit with Ace, but not to this extent. I can't even remember really seeing many companions, like what their home lives are, what their parents are doing and things like that. So yeah, I'd agree. I think they're doing it more with this season than they would with the classic series.
Yeah, there's just a couple of little interesting things that are starting to become more of a pattern as this goes on, and maybe because it's Earth, maybe because it is so focused on Earth is why they're highlighting capitalistic greed as much as they are.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
It's make it hit a bit more close to home, literally, as opposed to it being, well, that's another species. I'm sure glad we're not like those people with our corporate greed.
Yeah. But that makes sense though, like having the parallels between the corporate interest of humans and the corporate interest of Raxacoricophalopatorians, for example. That would also make sense as to why the Slitheen, they dress in human skin. So I think having those parallels, they're definitely deliberate, and they do kind of enhance the thematic focus on this sort of the toxic, polluting power of greed. So it's kind of cool that they've gone that route.
Yeah, but once again, we have to remember that it's not political.
Oh, of course.
And it won't be until 2017, but...
Yeah. Sweet Jesus.
Halfway through season 1, how many times have we had to point that out?
I'm gonna go ahead and say at least once per episode after Rose, I'd say. Yeah, I think it's been
at the very least once per recording session.
Yeah. Yeah, so
should we talk about Adam now?
Yes, let's do that.
So Adam is the kind of character that I think... So it's the first time, to my knowledge, that a companion has had a self-interest and a kind of grubby motivation to time travel. I'm positive that's not his intent from the start, but
that's what it kind of...
Yeah, it's the first time we've seen a companion really try and Marty McFly Back to the Future to it. Stealing a sports almanac is pretty much the equivalent of learning the history of computers from the 2000s to 200,000. And it's the kind of thing that it's the kind of thing that I would like to see them do with a proper companion. Maybe not to this sort of greed extent, but I would love to see the Doctor take in a companion, and then by the end of the series, you learn that they've been they've had malicious intentions for a long time, and you have to sort of look back and go, oh, were they really a good companion? Or it's hard to explain it now, but it's something that the Series 8 finale teased they were going to do with Clara. There was a big trailer that came out before Dark Water and Death in Heaven where it seemed like Clara was going to be the villain of the story, and then that it turned out it was complete false advertising, and that's not what was happening at all in the story. And which is a shame because it set up something really interesting. You know, what if a companion actually properly turned on the Doctor? What would drive them to do that? What could the Doctor do that would force a companion, someone that he's trusting more than basically anyone else, bringing aboard his home and showing the universe? What kind of thing would cause them to turn on him, and would they be right to do so? That kind of a companion story is something that I want them to do so badly because I think it would be so interesting if they got it right.
I have a feeling they've done that maybe a couple times even in the classic series. Maybe not to that extent, like in a long-term thing, but for example, and I guess he's not like an actual companion, but in Resurrection of the Daleks, you had I don't know, I'm forgetting his name, the guy who betrays them. It turns out he's a Dalek agent, and the cliffhanger of one of the episodes is literally him saying, "I serve the Daleks. I'm a Dalek agent." Duh, you know.
Is that Lytton?
No. One of the other guys who.
Oh yeah, no, that's vaguely familiar from when I watched that years back. But
yeah, the guy who shows up in like the first scene, who he gets called pathetic by his friend is with him. So anyway, that I think that's maybe an example of that, but I'm not sure. I have a feeling there are other examples of it though in the classic series. Maybe we'll discover it as we go along with this, but yeah. Having his interests be kind of selfish does give him an interesting dimension.
Yeah. But here's where I bring up the inconsistencies I was talking about before.
Yeah.
It's clear that he doesn't get this idea when he steps out of the TARDIS. Like that's obvious. From like he comes up with the idea when he's alone with the information kiosk, and he realizes that he can get some future knowledge that might help him. That's when he hatches that plan. That's when he realizes he can do something. It's not even a plan. It's just something that he decides to do.
Yeah.
And it's a very human thing to do. I don't necessarily fault it for him. It's the wrong thing to do, but it's something that would realistically cross your mind in that kind of situation. So the issue that I have with it is the couple of moments before that when it seems like he is up to something and is kind of shady. Like, it's when he gets Rose's phone and the TARDIS key. They both those moments have like an ominous music track behind them, making you think like, oh, what's Adam up to? But the main one is when he gets the TARDIS key, and as he's walking away, he smirks, as if, oh, it's all coming together. But again, at that point, he didn't have this plan, so why would he be smirking like that? And two, the TARDIS key doesn't factor into his plan at all. He only gets the TARDIS key so that it can be more dramatic later when Simon Pegg goes, oh, well, I've got the key now, so I can, do the time travel thing. So, like, that's the only reason he's given the key by Rose. There's he doesn't, the TARDIS doesn't factor into his plan, so why would he smirk in what can only, it's clearly being set up to be like he's planning something evil. That's intent. That's clear by the directing, by the backing track, by the acting. But that doesn't factor in at all, and he wasn't evil at that point, so what gives?
I hadn't noticed that, if I'm honest. I'm glad you've highlighted that. Yeah, I do see what you mean. I think yeah, like
those moments are there to set up he's going to do something that's bad, so that when he does do the scanning, the audience knows, oh, he shouldn't be doing that, without the Doctor having to tell him, don't mess with time, knowledge of the future can be dangerous. When he starts doing something based on the directing cues we had earlier, it's clear that it's a bad thing. But in universe, it doesn't make sense for him to do that.
Well, the curious thing is that element of him, screwing around with the web of time, which he, definitely should have been doing. I picked up on that, but that might just be because I'm familiar with the show. Like, I know that, messing with the web of time that severely is not something that even the Doctor would take a risk of doing. And we know this because the, last episode we watched was Attack of the Cybermen, where that plays in quite a bit. So that was a bad thing. Like, the small directing and music cues, they weren't what, caught me on to that fact, the fact that it was bad. But now that you've pointed them out, I do understand why you say that there's kind of an inconsistency. Certainly, if you are a new viewer to this show, if this is like your first season, and you haven't been able to sort of, acclimatize yourself to the web of time and how it all sort of fits together, I think that music cue is kind of what would indicate to you that this is kind of a suspicious thing to do, because the element of it being bad to mess with the web of time, they don't really address that properly until the very end, and they do definitely address it, but you wouldn't know that that's a really serious, important thing in this episode and Doctor Who generally, unless you'd been, a fan of the classic series, for example, or had seen other episodes. So, I can understand why you would call that an inconsistency.
But there's also, when he's watching Kathika do the brain information scan thing, he comments, like, Rose says, is it too much? And then he says, no, it's cool, man. Look at this technology. But then the next time we see him, he's, freaking out about all the technology.
Oh, yeah. Right, and the funny thing is, because he faints at some point, I think that's earlier. He faints at the start, Yeah, but then he says after, I think, the open brain thing, that doesn't he say, no, it's a bit much for me. I want to go out and stand on the deck and just acclimatize myself to all of this.
Yeah.
So having that, pardon?
I said yeah.
Yeah, having that after he's seen this, opening of the brain, and been presumably fine with it. Yeah, that's a bit kind of inconsistent, I guess. I mean, I don't know, maybe you could argue just in that moment when he's watching the brains opening, that's just him kind of absorbing the shock, but they don't really make that terribly clear. And then to have it go from that to, this is all a bit much for me, well, if it was a bit much for you, why didn't you faint again when you watched a woman's brain open?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out, it's stupid that the door in your brain can be opened by anybody.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. I think there was a bit where, because again, I watched it a second time this morning, but the bit where the nurse is telling him about the clicking of the fingers to open the brain thing, she doesn't click her fingers, she just kind of shows him that's how you do it. But I think I thought at some point it was only the person who owns the brain.
Well, that would be the assumption, because that's, not brain dead.
Yeah. And there's nothing, like, every indication that we've seen indicates that, it's the person whose brain is opening who controls the opening of the brain. So to have that kind of contradicted
in the final
scene
is
a little odd.
When he gets dropped off back at his house, and they have a little fun
his
moment
brain open.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe it's kind of poor form on the Doctor's part to go, you're messing with time by doing this. Anyway, now I'm going to leave you in the 21st century with 200,000 year technology that is going to be discovered immediately. Maybe that's a bit hypocritical, but...
Well, the weird... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that was basically the end of my point.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing is he specifically says, if you open your brain up, they're going to dissect you in 20 seconds, so good luck with that. And the thing is, if it was the case that only the person whose brain was opening up could open the brain, that would be fine.
Yeah.
That would be quite an interesting, good warning, and that would show him, that's what you get for messing with the web of time, this is serious, and I'm a serious person. That would be fine, but to already have established that the brain can be opened by anybody, and that they do this like 3 times in that last scene with Rose the Doctor and his mum, that's a bit of a mean-spirited
Yeah, for
thing to do.
for something that was by all account an innocent mistake,
Yeah.
or at the very least nowhere near as malicious as something we've seen other people do in the show before. It seems like a huge overreaction.
And the thing is, the element of warning people or even punishing people for messing with the web of time, that obviously gets brought up much more heavily in the next episode, Father's Day.
Except Rose doesn't get any punishment in that episode.
Yeah,
so.
it's like I mean, the Doctor does get. He loses his shit at her a little bit for sort of understandable reasons, but
she doesn't get dropped back home afterwards.
Yeah, she doesn't. So, establishing that in this episode on principle, that's a good idea. But like having this one detail, which is kind of there, even just as a joke, like as just this sort of we're being clever sort of punchline right at the end, where you can see the mother's reaction to his brain opening up. Like it seems kind of pointless. There was no real reason to do that. And even if you argue that, this is the Ninth Doctor, this is the Doctor who doesn't take people's shit, and this is a Doctor who's been through a lot and who takes the web time seriously. Yeah, well, you don't need him to be needlessly mean and nasty to make that come across, as we've established with Attack of the Cybermen. They don't need to. I understand making him slightly more edgified in this season because of the Time War being a good backstory to that, but they don't need to go quite that far with it, I think.
Yeah. To that, on that point, it's not a particularly strong showing from the Doctor or Rose in this episode, is it? Like they don't do an awful lot. They mainly just they do some legwork to discover what's going on, but even most of that the audience already knows from scenes with Suki and the editor and Kathika and all that stuff, and then they immediately get captured and Kathika has to save the day. It's not a great showing, and once again I feel like contractually obligated to point out Rose gets captured or trapped number 5. Get trapped in those manacles again. It's with the Doctor, but that's not the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah. And
also I want to point out this as well. So here's the main reason I dislike Adam as a character. It's not because he takes this heel turn in this episode and has these kinds of human feelings of maybe I can exploit this for personal gain, because what the hell, who wouldn't have at the very least a fleeting thought of that?
Yeah.
My main problem with Adam is that it perpetuates Rose being a bad person, specifically to Mickey.
Yeah.
Literally the start of the episode, the Doctor and Rose discuss where they are, and it's very clear that it's a deliberate attempt to make Adam impressed with Rose. It's a way of endearing him to her, and then explicitly, a moment later, we find out why. Rose calls him her boyfriend, and Rose doesn't immediately say, "What are you talking about, Doctor? I have a committed boyfriend back home who I haven't broken up with yet, so why would I be flirting with anyone else or trying to make them impress me like I'm doing in this scene? By the way, I don't consider him my boyfriend anymore because he just fainted, and I find that wimpy and sissy."
Well, that's the interesting thing, because I remember watching that bit of dialogue and I was curious to see what your reaction to it would be, but the dialogue kind of confused me a little bit, and this may just be me here, but when the Doctor says, he's your boyfriend, and she says not anymore, I was wondering, who were they referring to? Were they referring to Mickey? Were they saying, was the Doctor reminding Rose, you have a boyfriend, and she said, not anymore because I've got Adam? Or were they referring to Adam, saying, Adam's your boyfriend, and Rose says, no, not anymore because he faints and I don't like him.
It's pretty explicit that it's a reaction to Adam fainting, where the Doctor's going, that's who you're interested in, Rose? Oh my god. And Rose responds with, what are you talking about? I wouldn't be interested in a wuss like that.
Yeah.
But then they have more dialogue about it later. It's peppered throughout the episode of... There's another time where the Doctor's like, first date, and again, Rose doesn't go, he's not my boyfriend, I have a boyfriend. And then later, Adam says, you go with the Doctor, it's going to take a better man than me to come between you, clearly implying something more. And then Rose doesn't go, well, Mickey could, because he's my boyfriend.
And he also saved the Earth in the last episode. So
he saved the Earth a couple of stories back, and he's still being poorly treated by Rose, and for the love of God, if the show just addressed it once, I'd have no problem with it. But it seems to think that this kind of behavior is okay, and when little kids are watching this, looking up to your main characters, don't teach that lesson.
Yes, I'd wondered about that, because again, I'm not sure what it is. I don't have quite the gut reaction to that sort of behavior being kind of condoned by the show, but I do, again, as I think I've mentioned, I do understand why it would bother you, because they're not, as you say, they're not even addressing the issue. The way they're framing it in the narrative, it's just, oh yeah, haha, infidelities, cute, ooh, or something like that.
Look, it's just becoming a pattern, and it won't be until mid next season that Mickey finally starts to get treated right by Rose, and even then it's hypocritical on her part. But we'll get to that point in Age of Steel. But yeah, apart from that, there's not a lot that either of them do. The Doctor has some nice moments. But it's I kind of think this is the weakest the Ninth Doctor's been, purely because of how little he gets to do.
Yeah, it's very because again, it's so sort of Adam centric. There's a whole, I think, chunk where it's mainly him just running around getting open brain surgery and vomiting ice. Cubes.
Well, that also reminds me of another plot hole, or contrivance or whatever. So the whole point of Satellite 5 is the Jagrafess is installed right at the top, and in order to keep him alive, they pump heat down to keep the top cold. Which is why floor 139, they're constantly complaining that it's too hot and it's very sweaty and compact and all that stuff. So why is it that on floor 16, 123 floors lower, it's not boiling hot? If they're pumping heat down, that would have to mean that the lowest point of the Satellite 5 is the hottest.
Yeah.
But floor 16, it just seems like a regular medical bay. No, they're not really complaining about the heat at all. Like that's an incredibly tiny thing, and it's something that I didn't notice until watching this episode for this, and I've watched this episode a bunch before this. But like now that I think about it, it's just another. We've talked about RTD's world building, but this is something where he's kind of dropped the ball on that, because they could have just made it floor 250 is where you get your medical stuff done. And then...
because like surely wouldn't the bottom floors even be like for maintenance or engineering or something?
Yeah, the furnaces or whatever.
Yeah, like, I mean, granted, I don't know all the intricacies of, interplanetary space station construction, but like, yeah, you'd think the lower decks would be just where all the engines are.
Well,
and
especially if
the heat
is
rushing down.
Yeah,
there.
if that's the explicit purpose of Satellite 5 is to pump heat down to keep the Jagrafess cold.
Then surely, why not? Like, yeah, why would you put, a medical bay down there? Wouldn't it be, why wouldn't you have it at least, maybe halfway or something like that? Or maybe even higher up to kind of symbolize, oh, I'm getting the special open brain surgery. I'm moving up in the world, and, so having it just 16, like it just seems kind of...
Well, it's less about the number and
strange.
more about the fact that they're down there and they're not, collapsing from heat stroke constantly.
Well, that's the thing. It wouldn't even... If they just made it like, floor 2, 3, 5 or something, that wouldn't even be that difficult to change. It's just changing a number. But like 16, again, if the heat is going down there, why would you put the medical bay down there?
Yeah.
It's just quite strange. And again, I didn't really notice that until you pointed it out, and it is a smaller detail. It doesn't like ruin the story, I guess, but it is, I think, worth pointing out, because
it's the kind of thing that once I noticed it,
you can't unnotice it.
Well, I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop thinking. It was in the back of my mind at the very least for the entire time.
Yeah.
It's not like I was preoccupied with it to the point where I stopped paying attention. But it's the kind of little.
But it's there.
It's the little niggle that I had, and then was like, oh no.
Yeah. It's
Let's talk about Kathika and Suki.
Sure.
Kathika as a character, I find them very I don't know. They're kind of they've got their thing, which is like, you know, I want to be able to be promoted. I want to go up in the world. I want to be, you know, I want to to the point where, like, you know, she doesn't really. When the doctor's asking questions at the start, she's kind of dismissing him, going, "Jesus Christ, what's wrong with you?" But then as soon as she thinks he might be management, she sort of starts turning on the charm and, like, you know, smiling at him a bunch and, you know, constantly reminding him that she knows what she's doing. And there's a great interaction where she's like, you know, let's make sure that we're not doing anything, like, you know, hasty or, you know, bad. That's company policy. And then Suki has to go, it's the law.
Yeah.
I quite like that exchange. But Kathika, her flip to, you know, being essentially the hero of the story, it kind of comes out of nowhere because we don't really see her have a moment where she goes, you know, there's no concrete thing that we can see in the episode that makes her shift her perspective or change her mind about it. It would have been great if she could, like, you know, if we see her notice something on floor 139 that harkens back to something the doctor said previously, and then she goes, ugh, and then goes up to floor 500. But it's the kind of thing where it's like, you know, like, she's that desperate for a promotion. She's that desperate that she won't break the rules or anything like that. And she goes, I'm not going with you guys. And then we see her in one shot, and then she decides to go.
I feel
it's very hasty.
I might disagree with you there a bit. I feel like her ambition, in a weird way, that's the reason why she sort of became heroic in the end, because she realizes, oh, this is a lie, and I've been a fool to have this kind of ambition. Well, I'm gonna make it right. I'm gonna save the day here. I'm gonna.
Well,
you know,
you say that, but when she's actually doing it and the editor's fighting back, her line is, "Oh no, you don't. You should have promoted me years back." Despite the fact that she now knows what promotion means, it means that you become a meal for a Jagrafess and become a living corpse.
I interpreted that line in kind of an ironic way, like maybe it's her saying, "Oh, you should have killed me, or you should have gotten rid of me years ago, because now I'm fighting back against you."
To me, that is a very generous interpretation of what that line is. To me, it's what it says on the tin, especially because in her conversation with the doctor afterwards, you know, she doesn't say, you know, I'm gonna help make things right. I'm gonna, you know, let the people know what's been going on. That whole scene is just, she says, "Why aren't you staying? You need to tell people what's going on." And then once that gets answered, she goes, "Well, what about him?" Like, there's no real clear indication of how she's changed, which means that she kind of hasn't.
Yeah, I mean,
at the very least, there's more they could have done.
Yeah, because I assume you've certainly seen this episode more than I do, and you're right. I don't remember, like, a specific scene where she's like, "Oh, this is all really, really awful. Fuck you, editor. I'm gonna get you and save the day." And so yeah, it doesn't bother me terribly. I don't know. This isn't very logical, I guess, but I feel like there's enough change there. But
well, see, the thing is, Series 1 is populated by characters that side characters specific to that story, rather, that are changed by the Doctor and become better people as a result. And sometimes they, you know, many times it's them that resolves the conflict. Sometimes they've died in the process. You know, Gwyneth, Jabe, Harriet Jones, Kathika here. We'll see it in future episodes with, you know, Nancy and Pete Tyler, Linda in that story. And with all of them, there's a much more noticeable progression, I suppose. And at the very least, I feel like Catholic is the weakest of the bunch because, again, I don't really see that much growth in her, and her change to become that better person is very, very fleeting.
And I actually wonder, because who was it? Rose who found Suki at the desk, and she's like, "Oh, what's wrong with her?" Is that what happened?
Yes.
Yeah. So you wonder, I mean, if somehow Kathika was already up there, wouldn't have made more sense for character progression if she was the one who discovered Suki and she realized, oh, this person who I've kind of been jealous of and didn't treat very well, she's dead. Oh, I better make things right, I guess. But no, they just had Rose do it instead, which, yeah. So again, it didn't bother me terribly, but your reasoning is very sound on the topic. So
well, they draw attention to her being a journalist, but they don't really highlight the fact that it's her journalistic instincts that are what's causing her to investigate.
Yeah, they even show that it's kind of the opposite. She says, "Why would I question anything?" And the doctor says, "Because you're a journalist." I mean, you could argue maybe that was kind of a motivation, but we never really saw anything that indicated she saw that as a bit of motivation. It was just a line that the doctor said. So, yeah, fair enough.
I quite like Suki in this.
Yeah, she's all right.
She's charming at the start of it. Her turn to being an anarchist is an interesting one that you don't really see coming the first time you watch it. The actress does a good job portraying both versions of the character.
Yeah, I like that, the very quick change. It was a very convincing one.
Yeah, exactly.
And quite emotionally satisfying, and was nice to kind of see her standing up to this bully. So, yeah, I quite liked her. I like that sort of, that character arc.
One thing I do want to ask about Suki, and this is something that's pretty much always bothered me about this story. How does she die?
Yeah, good question, because they don't...
It's implied that the Jagrafess attacks or, in some way devours her. But when we see her working at the monitors later, there's not a scratch on her. She's
dead.
Yeah, she's clearly been killed, but there's no visible signs of how that happened.
Yeah.
And they don't allude to it later when they reveal the Jagrafess. They don't point out why he's a big threat. They don't really say, oh, and he drains all the life out of his victims with a single touch. And that's how he gets, that's how he feeds, basically. So, I see, there's a lot about this episode that just feels kind of incomplete. The stuff with the Jagrafess doesn't really feel like it's fleshed out enough. Kathika doesn't feel fleshed out enough. The Doctor and Rose have very little to do. In that sense, you got to wonder, did this need to be a two-part story? But then the other side of you says, well, no, because nothing happened in one episode of this story. This episode is quite a lot of setup, and then...
not a lot of payoff.
And then, 5 minutes of it all resolving itself. Not in a way that doesn't make sense. I mean, all the elements kind of fit together, but, it's not... I don't know, it's a weird one.
It is. It's quite a strange episode, because even, the really serious, messing with the web of time, that gets taken care of in, 5 minutes. So it's not like it plays a part in the story, it all kind of works together, but it's not even a massive part in terms of runtime. So I do see what you mean when you say it's quite a lot of setup and quite a lot of substantial world building, but they don't really follow through with some of it.
Yeah.
And it all just kind of not collapses, but it feels a bit muddled, I suppose, by the end.
In that sense, I wonder if it's the Adam subplot that's getting in the way. If you remove it, you have time to flesh out this other stuff. The only thing you would lose is a way for the editor to find out who the Doctor is. And you can easily just have that be, well, you're not telling me? Fine, I'll do a quick brain scan. Here, I'll hook you up to the thing, and we'll see who you are that way. There are ways you can get that information despite without involving 15 to 20 minutes of an Adam subplot that almost gets in the way.
Which is strange, because I think Adam is sort of playing a bit of a fish out of water character, which is a fairly typical thing you see in Doctor Who for a number of reasons. But what is his purpose beyond that, and why do we need a fish out of water? Because we can always, all the intricacies of this kind of just get explained to Rose, or can't she be doing some of the investigating? Or he's as you say, he's just kind of there. And there are other characters like Kathika who again, because of that character arc, she had the potential to be actually quite interesting, but they just didn't have time to really focus on her that much. You wonder whether they couldn't have had, that relationship between Suki and Kathika. They set it up as being a confrontational one at the beginning. Couldn't have they spent more time exploring that relationship? And that could have spurred Kathika on to do the right thing, but they didn't really do that because they didn't have the time, because they were too focused on this Adam business. So yeah, I think that's a fair call, honestly.
Yeah, but it's an interesting, because the Adam stuff is kind of unique in that it's a companion going rogue. So, I would be... That's why I want that kind of story about a companion, making a heel turn. That's why I want that to be a big focus at some point, because I feel like you can do it better in a way that actually ties into a full story, let alone a full series arc. That'd be cool to see. But yeah, I mean, it's the long game, and it's
something.
I'm trying to work out if I think it's a 5 or a 4.
Yeah, I was actually almost going to give it a 6 at the beginning of this episode. This podcast, excuse me.
I've been doing that a lot recently, where I've been dragging you down to my thought process, where you've been going in more, it's not too bad, and then we talk about it, and you go, no, actually, maybe it is.
I don't know whether that's just a question of different tastes, or whether you're slightly harsher than me, but yes, that has happened quite a number of times now. Funny how that works. But yeah, I think, I don't know, maybe it's just because we notice different things.
Yeah.
Like you've pointed out stuff that I didn't notice, certainly, so... yeah, I feel like... I'm probably going to have to give it a 5, because 4 for me is like Legend of the Sea Devils level, and I wasn't remotely as frustrated with this episode as I was with Legend of the Sea Devils.
See, so... I gave Legend a 3, which is why I feel like I have a bit more freedom to give it a 4.
I'm going to stick with a 5 though. Yeah, not horrendous, but yeah, not amazing. You can understand why people say this is a very episode.
Tell you what, it's a 4, but it gets a bonus point for Simon Pegg.
4.5. Well, no, we don't do that, do we?
But the bonus point brings it up to a 5. If Simon Pegg wasn't as charismatic as he is, it would be a 4.
This would have been completely forgettable. But as I said, they cast it really well, because there was always a risk with that sort of character for him to be a kind of a annoying, corporate suit. So the fact that he's having so much fun with it does elevate it, I think, a bit. So good for them in terms of casting, but yeah, I think 5, certainly for me.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with that.
Cool.
Well, job done. Another episode thoroughly reviewed.
Yep, we managed to talk for about an hour and 5 minutes, which is pretty good.
And next time, we're going to be diving back into the classic series with The Happiness Patrol.
I'm glad you're happy. That'll only make sense next week.
I think it makes sense knowing what the title of the episode is.
That's true.
Until then, I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And...
keep your mind open.
I was going to save my outro for next week and go, I was playing the long game, but you've done it for me, so... At least now the audience won't think that we just accidentally edited out the outro.
Yeah, fair enough.